I never thought the moment that would crack my life open would start with something as stupid as a phone notification at 2:17 in the morning. I remember the exact time because the glow of the screen burned into my eyes while the rest of the apartment was dark and quiet. My wife Emily, breathing softly beside me like everything in the world was still normal. The notification wasn't even meant for me. Her phone lit up on the nightstand, vibrating against the wood, and normally I would have ignored it because trust had always been the one thing I believed we still had after 9 years of marriage. But that night something in my gut twisted. The preview of the message appeared before the screen went dark again, and the name on it wasn't one I recognized. What froze my blood wasn't just the name. It was the message underneath it that read, "I miss you already." Tonight was worth the risk. I remember staring at the ceiling afterward, completely still, telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Some joke between coworkers or some misunderstanding I was too tired to process. But the truth was already sitting in my chest like a stone that refused to move. For the next few days, I tried to pretend everything was fine, but once you notice something like that, you start seeing cracks everywhere. Emily began guarding her phone like it contained state secrets, flipping it face down whenever I walked into the room, suddenly taking late-evening work calls, and leaving the apartment dressed nicer than usual for meetings that supposedly lasted hours. One night I tried to confront her gently, telling her that things felt different between us and asking if everything was okay. She gave me this exaggerated laugh that sounded more like an accusation than reassurance and said, "Michael, you're imagining things again. Not everything in the world revolves around your paranoia." She said it with that cold little smile she used whenever she wanted to make me feel ridiculous, and somehow I ended up apologizing for even asking. Looking back now, that was the moment I should have realized something was very wrong, because Emily had always been good at two things: turning every question back on me and lying with absolute confidence. The real turning point came 3 nights later when something happened that I still replay in my head over and over. I left work early because my boss canceled a late meeting, and I thought maybe surprising Emily with takeout would help us reconnect after the tension of the past week. When I walked into the apartment, though, the first thing I noticed was that the place was too quiet, and the second thing I noticed was a man's jacket draped across the back of our kitchen chair. For a moment, I honestly thought I had entered the wrong apartment because nothing in my brain wanted to accept what that meant. Then I heard voices coming from the bedroom. Emily's voice laughing in a way I hadn't heard in months, soft and excited like she used to sound when we were first dating. That was the moment everything inside me dropped into my stomach, because I knew before I even opened that door that whatever was happening behind it was about to destroy the life I thought I had. And somehow, even then, I still believed the worst thing waiting on the other side was the truth. I had no idea it was only the beginning. I stood outside that bedroom door for what felt like an entire lifetime, compressed into a few seconds, my hand hovering inches from the handle, while my mind desperately tried to invent any explanation that didn't involve the obvious one. I remember hearing Emily's voice through the door, low and playful in a way that felt completely foreign to me, like I was listening to a stranger wearing my wife's voice. Then there was a man's voice answering her, confident and comfortable, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who clearly believes he has every right to be exactly where he is. Something inside my chest cracked open in that moment, and before I could stop myself, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. What I saw didn't come with screaming or dramatic music like in the movies, just 2 people frozen in shock, tangled in my life like they had been there all along and I was the one intruding. Emily's face drained of color the instant she saw me standing there, and for a few seconds the room was silent except for my own breathing, which sounded louder than it should have, like my body was trying to remind me that I was still alive, even though something important inside me had just died. The guy scrambled out of the bed like someone who had just realized the building was on fire, pulling on his shirt while avoiding my eyes. And I remember thinking how absurd it was that this stranger was standing in my bedroom, putting his clothes on while my wife clutched the blanket around herself like modesty still mattered after what I had just walked in on. Emily recovered first, because she always did. She stood up, crossed her arms, and instead of looking guilty, she looked irritated, like I had just interrupted something important. Then she said the words that made my stomach twist in a way I still can't describe. "Michael, you weren't supposed to be home yet." Not, "I'm sorry. Not this isn't what it looks like." Just annoyance, like I had broken some unspoken schedule she had carefully arranged. The man muttered something about leaving and rushed past me out of the apartment. But I barely noticed him leaving because I was staring at Emily, trying to understand how the person I married could stand there acting like the problem in the room was my timing. I asked her the only question my brain could form, my voice shaking in a way I hated because it made me sound weak in a moment when I needed strength more than anything. I asked her how long it had been going on, and she rolled her eyes like the question bored her. She said it started a few months ago, like she was talking about when she changed gyms or started a new diet, and when I asked who he was, she shrugged and told me he was someone who actually listened to her. Then she added something that felt like someone twisting a knife deeper into a wound that had barely opened. "You've been emotionally absent for years, Michael, so don't pretend you're shocked." That was the first twist that made the situation worse than simple betrayal, because suddenly the story wasn't about her cheating. According to her, it was about me failing her first. But the night wasn't done getting worse. While we were arguing, her phone buzzed again on the dresser, and without thinking, I grabbed it before she could reach it. She lunged toward me, suddenly panicked for the first time that evening, but it was already too late because the message preview lit up the screen. The name attached to the message was someone I knew, someone I trusted, someone who had sat at our dinner table dozens of times over the years. The message read, "Did he find out yet?" And the name above it belonged to my best friend Daniel. That was the moment the room started spinning, because suddenly the betrayal wasn't just my wife lying to me. It meant the person I trusted most in the world might have been part of it the entire time. And as Emily stood there trying to grab the phone from my hands, I realized with growing horror that the night still wasn't finished, revealing just how deep the lies actually went. I remember the exact moment my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing on that screen. Daniel's name sat there in bright white letters like some kind of sick joke the universe decided to play on me. Daniel wasn't just a friend. He was the guy who stood next to me at my wedding, the one who helped me move apartments twice, the one who used to joke that Emily was the sister he never had. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone, and Emily's reaction told me everything before she even spoke. She didn't look surprised that I saw the message. She looked terrified that I might scroll further. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone from my hand, her voice suddenly sharp and desperate as she said, "Michael, give me that right now. You're taking things out of context." That sentence alone made my blood boil because people who are innocent don't talk about context. They talk about truth. I stepped back and unlocked the phone before she could stop me, my heart pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. The message thread opened, and what I saw there felt like watching my entire life collapse line by line. Daniel and Emily had been talking for months, maybe longer. Not just casual conversation either. They were coordinating things. They were discussing when I would be at work, when I'd be visiting my parents, when it would be safe. And then came the twist that made everything even worse. Daniel wasn't the guy who had just run out of the apartment. The guy in my bedroom had a different name entirely. The messages made that brutally clear. Daniel had written earlier that same evening, "Just make sure he doesn't come home early tonight. I can't deal with another close call like last time." My head snapped up from the phone, and I looked at Emily with a kind of confusion that felt almost worse than the anger. I asked her quietly, slowly, like I was talking through broken glass, "So which one is it, Emily? Him or Daniel?" She hesitated. That hesitation was enough to confirm the truth before the words even came out. Then she said something that somehow managed to make the situation even more surreal. She said Daniel was different, that Daniel actually understood her, that things with him were complicated. According to her twisted explanation, the guy who had just been in our bed was just someone she had been seeing recently, while Daniel had been there emotionally for years. I remember laughing at that point, not because anything was funny, but because my brain simply refused to believe what it was hearing. My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She had apparently been juggling multiple relationships while telling me everything in our marriage was fine. But the next twist came almost immediately, and it hit harder than anything else so far. While I was still staring at the messages, another one popped up from Daniel in real time. It said, "Tell him the truth already. He deserves to know." That sentence made the room go completely silent. I looked at Emily again and asked her what Daniel meant by the truth. And for the first time that night, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. She tried to brush it off, saying he was just being dramatic, but I could see it in her face that something bigger was hiding behind all of this. Something worse than the cheating itself. Something she had been planning to keep from me for a very long time. And when she finally spoke again, her voice quieter than before, she said something that made the floor feel like it disappeared under my feet. She told me the cheating wasn't even the biggest problem in our marriage. She said the real problem was that for the past year she had been living a completely separate life that I knew absolutely nothing about. At that moment, I realized the betrayal I had just discovered might only be the surface of something far deeper. And the more I looked at my wife standing there in my bedroom, the more I started to understand that I might not actually know the person I married at all. I stared at Emily, waiting for her to explain what that message from Daniel meant, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything else that had happened that night. When someone pauses like that after being asked a simple question, you already know the answer is going to hurt. She walked to the window, crossing her arms like she was trying to hold herself together, and for the first time since I walked into that room, she looked uncertain. I asked her again what Daniel meant by the truth, and she sighed in that irritated way she used whenever she thought I was being dramatic. Then she said something that completely derailed the argument I thought we were having. She said, "Michael, this marriage has been over for a long time. You just refuse to see it." Hearing that felt like someone rewriting the history of my own life while I was still standing in it. I demanded she stop talking in vague statements and tell me exactly what was going on. That's when she started revealing pieces of something that made the entire situation feel less like an affair and more like a carefully planned operation. According to her, the cheating hadn't even started with Daniel. It had started with someone from her gym months earlier. That relationship ended, then Daniel happened, and sometime after that, she met the guy I had just found in our bed. She talked about it like she was explaining a timeline of jobs she had worked rather than relationships she had hidden from her husband. I kept waiting for her to realize how insane it sounded, but instead she kept going, almost like she was relieved the secret was finally out. Then she dropped the next twist so casually it took a few seconds for the words to actually sink in. She told me she had been planning to leave me for nearly a year. Not just thinking about it, planning it. She said she had already talked to a lawyer months earlier and had started separating some finances quietly so the transition would be easier when she finally filed for divorce. Hearing that felt worse than the cheating itself because betrayal in the moment can be reckless or emotional. But betrayal that takes months of preparation is cold and deliberate. I asked her why she hadn't just left if she was so unhappy. That's when she said something that made the situation darker than I imagined. She admitted she was waiting for the right moment, specifically after something happened at my job. That caught my attention immediately because I hadn't mentioned anything about work during the argument. I asked her what she meant, and she looked at me like she had already said too much. But the damage was done. Slowly, reluctantly, she explained that Daniel had been telling her things about my company, things I didn't even know myself yet. According to Daniel, layoffs were coming, major ones, and my department was supposedly at the top of the list. Emily had been preparing to leave me right around the time she expected me to lose my job. When I asked her why she would wait for that moment instead of leaving earlier, she answered with a brutal honesty, I almost wish she had kept to herself. She said, "Because if you lost your job first, the divorce would be easier for me." For a moment, I couldn't even speak. My best friend had apparently been feeding my wife information about my career behind my back, while my wife was secretly preparing to abandon me once my life started falling apart. But the night still wasn't finished revealing its twists. My phone buzzed in my pocket right then, interrupting the silence in the room. It was a text message from Daniel himself. The message was short, but it completely reframed everything I thought I understood about the situation. It said, "Michael, if you're with Emily right now, you need to leave the apartment immediately. You're not safe there." And just like that, the betrayal I thought I had uncovered suddenly started to feel like the beginning of something even stranger. My phone was still in my hand when Daniel's message appeared, and for a moment, I honestly thought it was some kind of sick joke. The timing alone made no sense. 10 seconds earlier, I had been staring at messages proving he had been secretly talking with my wife for months, and now suddenly he was texting me like he was trying to warn me about something. I read the message again slowly. "Michael, if you're with Emily right now, you need to leave the apartment. Immediately. You're not safe there." I felt this wave of anger rise in my chest, because after everything I had just seen, the last thing I wanted was some dramatic warning from the same guy who had been lying to my face for God knows how long. Emily saw the message on my screen and her reaction changed instantly. Her irritation disappeared and was replaced by something much closer to panic. She stepped toward me quickly and said, almost under her breath, "Don't answer him." That reaction alone set off every alarm in my head. A few minutes ago, she had been cold, almost bored with the whole confrontation, but now she suddenly looked nervous in a way that felt completely different. I asked her why Daniel would say something like that, and she immediately tried to brush it off. She told me Daniel was probably just trying to manipulate the situation or scare me so he could play the hero later. The problem was that explanation didn't make sense either, because Daniel wasn't the type to send cryptic warnings. He was always direct, almost annoyingly logical about things. I looked back at the phone, noticing that 3 dots appeared under his name like he was typing again. Another message came through. "Michael, I'm serious." I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. "Just get out of there and call me." That was the moment my anger started mixing with confusion. I asked Emily what Daniel meant by how bad things had gotten, and instead of answering, she started pacing the room. She kept repeating that Daniel had always been dramatic and that I shouldn't listen to him, but the more she talked, the less convincing she sounded. Then I asked her a simple question that made her freeze in place. I asked her why she had looked scared the second she saw Daniel's message. She didn't answer right away, which told me everything I needed to know. When someone who lies constantly suddenly becomes quiet, it means the truth is standing right behind the lie, waiting to come out. Before she could say anything else, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Daniel. It was my neighbor from the apartment next door, a guy named Victor who almost never texted me unless something was wrong. His message was short, but it made the air in the room feel colder. "Hey man, I didn't want to get involved earlier, but I think you should know there's been someone coming into your apartment when you're not home." Different guy than the one I saw tonight. I read that message twice, slowly, feeling the weight of it settle into my chest. That meant the situation wasn't just 3 people tangled in lies. It meant there had been more, and apparently my neighbor had been watching it happen for weeks. I looked up at Emily again and asked the question I wasn't sure I actually wanted the answer to anymore. "How many people have been coming here, Emily?" She opened her mouth to respond, but before a word came out, there was a loud knock at the front door of the apartment. Not a polite knock either. 3 hard bangs that echoed through the hallway like someone who wasn't planning to wait patiently. Emily's face turned completely pale, and that was the moment I realized whatever was happening in my life had just gotten far more complicated than a cheating spouse and a lying friend. The knock on the door sounded again, louder this time. 3 heavy strikes that echoed through the apartment like someone who wasn't just visiting but demanding entry. I remember how Emily's face went completely white in that moment. and the shift in her expression scared me more than the knock itself. A few minutes earlier, she had been defensive, arrogant even, like the entire situation was beneath her. Now she looked like someone who had just realized a disaster was about to walk through the front door. I asked her quietly who was out there, and she shook her head immediately, too quickly, saying she didn't know. That answer felt like another lie layered on top of a growing pile of them. The knocking came again, harder this time, followed by a man's voice from the hallway that carried through the door clearly enough for both of us to hear. "Emily, open the door. I know he's in there." Every muscle in my body locked up when I heard that. Whoever it was already knew I had come home. I looked back at Emily, and she didn't even try to pretend anymore. She just whispered, almost pleading, "Michael, don't open it." The problem was that the way she said it didn't sound like concern for me. It sounded like fear of whoever was standing outside. That alone made me more curious than cautious. My entire life had just been turned upside down in less than an hour, and at that point, the idea of another surprise almost felt inevitable. I walked toward the door anyway. Emily grabbed my arm and tried to stop me, which only confirmed that whatever was waiting outside was something she absolutely didn't want me to see. I pulled my arm free and opened the door before she could say anything else. Standing in the hallway was a man I had never seen before, tall, tense, breathing heavily like he had just run up the stairs. For a few seconds, he just stared at me, studying my face like he was making sure I was actually the person he expected to see. Then he said something that made the entire situation twist in a direction I hadn't even considered. "You're Michael, right? Good. Because we need to talk about your wife." Behind me, Emily made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a curse under her breath. The man stepped inside before I even had time to respond, and he looked past me directly at her with an expression that was half anger and half disbelief. "So this is the husband you never told me about," he said. My mind struggled to keep up. I had already discovered the guy from the bedroom, then Daniel's messages, then my neighbor hinting there had been even more men coming and going. But the stranger standing in my doorway didn't look like someone sneaking around. He looked like someone who felt betrayed. I asked him who he was. He answered without hesitation. "My name is Aaron," he said, "and Emily has been telling me for 6 months that she was separated from her husband." The room went completely silent after that. I slowly turned my head and looked back at Emily, and the look on her face told me Aaron wasn't lying. But before I could even begin to process that new piece of information, Aaron added something that made the entire story darker than I thought possible. "And that's not even the reason I came here tonight," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up so I could see the screen. "Michael, did she tell you about the money?" The moment those words left his mouth, I realized the betrayal I had been uncovering all night might not even be about relationships at all. Something far bigger had been happening behind my back, and judging by the way Emily looked at Aaron now, I had just stepped into the middle of a secret that was about to change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Aaron held the phone in front of me like it was a piece of evidence in a courtroom, and I could feel the tension in the room tightening with every second that passed. Emily looked at that phone the way someone looks at a bomb that's already ticking down to zero. I asked him slowly what money he was talking about, and he glanced at her first before answering, almost like he was giving her one last chance to come clean. When she stayed silent, he turned the screen toward me. What I saw there didn't make sense at first. It was a series of bank transfers. Large ones. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, sometimes even 10. All of them going to an account I didn't recognize. But what made my stomach drop was the name attached to the sending account. It was my account. The joint account Emily and I had shared for years. For a moment I honestly thought Aaron was showing me something fake, because I would have noticed that kind of money disappearing. But when I looked closer, I realized the transfers weren't happening all at once. They were spaced out across months, carefully timed so none of them were large enough individually to trigger any alerts from the bank. My head snapped toward Emily. "How much?" I asked. She didn't answer. Aaron did. About 60,000, he said quietly. The room spun for a second as the number sank in. $60,000 had been quietly drained out of our life while I had been working late shifts and worrying about promotions and mortgage payments. And suddenly, all the other pieces of the night started clicking into place in ways that made the betrayal even worse. The cheating, the secret relationships, the financial planning for a divorce. It wasn't chaos, it was strategy. I demanded to know where the money went, but Emily still refused to speak. She just stood there staring at the floor like the truth might somehow disappear if she didn't acknowledge it. Aaron, however, looked increasingly angry, like someone who had been lied to just as badly as I had. She told me it was for a business, he said, some startup she was working on after the divorce. I felt something cold settle into my chest. After the divorce? Aaron nodded. That's what she said. She told me you two were already basically over, that you were controlling the finances and she needed help getting her independence back. I laughed then, but there was nothing even remotely humorous in it. It was the kind of laugh that happens when a person realizes the reality they were living in was a carefully constructed illusion. But the night still wasn't finished twisting the knife. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Another message from Daniel. This one was longer. Michael, you need to listen to me. I know you probably hate me right now, but you don't understand what Emily has been doing. The reason I told her about the layoffs wasn't to help her. I was trying to see how far she would go. I think she's been running a scam. I stared at the message, then read it again slowly. A scam. I looked back at Emily, who suddenly looked less like an angry spouse and more like someone whose carefully built story was collapsing piece by piece. Aaron noticed the message too. What did he say? He asked. I turned the screen toward him so he could read it. His face darkened instantly. Then he said something that completely reframed the entire nightmare. That explains it, Aaron muttered. Explains what? I asked. He looked directly at me. Because I'm not the only guy she's asked for money. Behind us, Emily whispered one word under her breath. No. But it was too late. Aaron continued. There are 4 of us that I know about. And in that moment, I realized the cheating, the lies, even the stolen money might only be the surface of something far more disturbing. Emily hadn't just been betraying her marriage. She might have been running a con on the people closest to her. And judging by the growing pile of evidence appearing in front of me, I had probably been the biggest victim of all. Aaron's words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. 4 of us. For a moment, nobody in the room moved. Emily looked like someone whose entire plan had just been exposed under bright lights. Aaron stood there with his jaw clenched, still holding the phone that had started unraveling everything. And I just stood between them trying to understand how my marriage had somehow turned into a financial crime scene. I asked the question slowly because part of me didn't want to hear the answer. 4, including me. Aaron nodded. You, me, and 2 others I know about. There might be more. Behind us, Emily suddenly snapped out of her frozen silence. That's not true, she said quickly, but the way her voice cracked made it obvious she was already losing control of the story. Aaron ignored her and kept talking. The way she explained it to me was always the same, he said. She told each of us she was stuck in a bad marriage, that you controlled the money, that she was planning to leave but needed help getting started. Every sentence felt like another brick dropping on my chest. I looked back at Emily. Tell me he's lying. She didn't answer. That silence was the loudest confirmation I had heard all night. Aaron continued. She said she was starting a small consulting business, said she just needed some startup capital before the divorce went through. I gave her $12,000. My stomach twisted. And the others? I asked. Another guy gave 15, Aaron said. And the last one, I think around 10. That number ran through my head instantly. 12, 15, 10. Add the 60,000 she had taken from our joint account, and the total climbed close to $100,000. Emily suddenly exploded. Stop talking, she shouted at Aaron. It was the first time all night she sounded truly desperate. but Aaron didn't stop. "Michael, I didn't come here tonight to fight with you," he said. "I came because I found out something this morning." He held up his phone again. "I talked to the other guys." My heart skipped. "You talked to them?" Aaron nodded. That's when I realized something was off. The stories she told each of us didn't match. Emily looked like she might faint. "What stories?" I asked. Aaron exhaled slowly. "To one of them, she said you were abusive. To another, she said you were already divorced but hiding assets from her." I felt a wave of cold anger rise inside me. "And what about you?" I asked. Aaron gave a bitter laugh. "To me, she said you were cheating on her." That almost made me laugh again. The irony was so absurd. It barely felt real. But the final twist of the night was still waiting. Aaron scrolled through his phone again and showed me something else. A group chat. 3 unfamiliar numbers, and his. The title of the chat read, "Emily Situation." My eyes moved down the screen. Messages between the men, comparing stories, comparing payments, comparing lies. And the final message at the bottom had been sent just 30 minutes ago. Aaron tapped it. It was from Daniel. "She's done this before." I looked up sharply. "Before?" Aaron nodded grimly. "That's why your friend warned you." My phone buzzed again in my hand. Another message from Daniel appeared. This one was short. "Michael, I think she's been doing this for years, with different guys in different cities." The room fell silent again. Slowly, very slowly, I turned my head toward Emily. For the first time that night, she didn't look angry. She didn't look defensive. She looked cornered. And that was when the final piece of the story started forming in my mind. The affairs, the lies, the hidden money, the multiple men. This wasn't just cheating. My wife hadn't just betrayed me. She had been running the same play over and over again. And the terrifying part was the question that suddenly appeared in my head. Was I even the first husband she had done this to?